If it's Monday, backlash over the Supreme Court's abortion decision. Thousands of protesters take to the streets in dozens of cities nationwide, demanding action now from lawmakers and from the president. The latest on the ruling and the future of abortion rights in just a moment. Plus, another surprise shakeup from the January 6th committee. Lawmakers move the next hearing up to tomorrow. What we know and still don't know about the evidence yet to come. And later, Russia advances in Ukraine. Missiles pummel Kyiv. And now President Zelensky says more Russian rockets just hit a shopping mall. All this as President Biden meets with the G7 and other world leaders in nearby Germany. Welcome to Beat the Press Now. I'm Peter Alexander in for Chuck, and we begin today with the top story in American politics, the escalating fallout from the bombshell Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. Across the country, demonstrators took to the streets over the weekend as a number of states immediately began rolling back access to abortions in the wake of that ruling. Today, Mississippi's Attorney General formally certified that state's trigger law, banning the procedure beginning in 10 days. That leaves the state's 15-week ban in effect for that limited period of time. Right now, new bans or restrictions on abortion are in effect in roughly a dozen states. Meanwhile, Democratic lawmakers have begun ramping up pressure on President Biden. They're urging him to take every action that he can to blunt the impact of the ruling, even as the White House's options are limited. More than 30 Senate Democrats have now signed onto a letter demanding the White House take, quote, bold action. That is roughly 2/3 of the party's caucus. In this letter, they write, quote, this is an unprecedented assault on women and the result of decades of activism by Republican extremists. We call on you to combat these attacks and take immediate action to use the full force of the federal government to protect access to abortion in the United States. And here's what some of the more progressive members of the president's party are now pushing for.
I do believe that there has been a weak Democratic strategy in the past, and we cannot continue to use those same playbooks. Right now, as I say, is that this is overtime for our democracy, and we must be aggressive.
This court has lost legitimacy. They have burned whatever legitimacy they may still have had after their gun decision, after their voting decision, after their union decision. They just took the last of it and set a torch to it with the Roe versus Wade opinion. I believe we need to get some confidence back in our court, and that means we need more justices on the United States Supreme Court.
The words of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Elizabeth Warren there. With an unpopular president and record inflation, Democrats were bracing for a very difficult midterms, and now strategists and candidates are hoping that this decision could boost turnout, could shift things. We're already seeing reports of some Republican leaders, including the former president Donald Trump, expressing concern that this issue might blunt their midterm advantage. As the first polls in the wake of the court's decision, like this one from NPR, PBS, Marist, show that voters, by and large, oppose it. I'm joined now by some of my NBC News colleagues. Josh Lederman has the very latest from the White House. Dasha Burns is in Michigan, where she has been speaking to voters in the wake of that ruling. Dasha, we'll get to you in a moment, but Josh, to you on the lawn if we can. What should we expect out of this White House this week as the dust settles from this ruling? We know that the president's limited in what he can do. By the way, he's also overseas right now. But what steps do we expect the administration to take? The president already detailed some of them. Others are calling for travel vouchers and the like to be able to travel from one state where it may be banned to another state where an abortion would be legal.
Well, Peter, for Democrats who are hoping for sweeping action from the White House to ensure that every woman in America has access to abortion, they're going to be sorely disappointed because the White House is making very clear that is not something that they can do. And in fact, their hands are mostly tied here. As you pointed out, very limited options. And the main options they had are the ones that they already announced Friday, just hours after that Supreme Court ruling, namely protecting the ability of women to travel across state lines guidelines through actions from the Justice Department, and also trying to preserve a widespread access to abortion medications through actions from the Health and Human Services Department and from the FDA. But when it comes to broader steps, that may be beyond what this White House feels that they can do. For example, this proposal to have federal lands be used to provide access to abortion in states that are going to ban abortion. I just spoke, Peter, to a White House official who said that that is a well-intentioned proposal, but it could put women and providers at risk. That White House official is saying that in states where abortion is illegal, women and providers who go onto federal land to seek abortions could potentially be prosecuted, given that as soon as they leave that federal land, they are once again back in a state that has banned abortion. And so that does not seem to be an idea that the White House is particularly keen on right now. And instead, I think what we should expect to see over the coming days and weeks is more things along the lines of what we saw from the Health and Human Services Department today, which was basically an open letter to insurance companies reminding them that by law, under the Affordable Care Act, they have to provide no-cost contraception to women. Don't get any wrong ideas, the White House is saying, that you can stop providing contraception simply because the Supreme Court has taken a step to sort of narrow that gap between church and state. But the White House making very clear they really have few options here other than to continue to make the case for people to go out and vote in November and in subsequent elections for lawmakers who will then act, hopefully, in their view, to create a right in law for women to seek abortion care nationwide.
Yeah, we're hearing from the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi within the last few minutes, sending a letter to her Democratic colleagues, saying, among other things, that a Democratic majority, if they are to win a majority this fall again, could help get rid of the filibuster. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges on the Senate side for that. Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema among those who do not believe in blowing up the filibuster, presumably not in this case either. And Dasha, you've been talking to voters in Michigan all weekend. Michigan is significant, a Democratic-run state. Gretchen Whitmer there still has a 1931 law in the books to ban abortion that's been fought over in the court. So what are you hearing as they react there to this Supreme Court ruling?
Well, look, Peter, this is an issue that's often painted as purely red or blue, black or white. And in my conversations with women over the weekend, we found a whole lot of purple, a whole lot of gray. I sat down with 4 women who come from very, very similar political backgrounds, but where they fall on this issue is pretty different. Take a listen to just some of our conversation.
Who here has typically voted Republican their voting lives? Who here considers themselves religious?
I was very overwhelmed with joy. We all have value, that we are born with an inherent dignity.
On Friday, honestly, I cried on and off all day. I have a daughter who's 7, and I just think about the fact that, this is going to start rolling out so many different legal implications for human rights.
My first reaction was, please let us not then take this pendulum and swing it ways so that now, like, abortion illegal for anything. There's
no black or white, all or nothing.
Black or white, all or nothing.
Peter, it was also interesting to see where they found common ground, and one area is what they feel like is missing from this conversation, which is talk about the support that pregnant women need, that mothers need. There has been very little conversation about what to do to provide resources and services to women who are having children. If we're going to talk about bans, they want to also see leadership talking about how to provide what mothers need, Peter.
And Dasha, I can't tell you how many campaign trips I've taken that stop right by that river there in Grand Rapids, a more conservative part of the state. How, based on your conversations, what are you hearing about the impact this may have on the midterms? Is this alone a motivating factor, an issue that may motivate those individuals and some of their friends?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a motivating factor, and I think it's going to be a motivating factor for people on both sides of this issue, frankly. What's interesting, though, is when I talk to these women about sort of how these decisions are being made, their frustration has been where this decision ultimately falls, right? They don't want to see this play out in a legal battle in the courts. And right now, that's what's happening in a lot of states, too. You know, you had this decision from the Supreme Court saying send it back to the states. Well, in a lot of places, like in Michigan, right now, it's now in the states, but it's in the state courts. They would rather have voters use their voice. And there is a proposal here in Michigan to try to get a referendum on the ballot for November so that people could do just that, to vote on whether or not abortion rights should be enshrined in the state's constitution, Peter.
Dasha Burns, we thank you. Before that, NBC's Josh Lederman as well. Josh, thanks to you. We want to get now to the Democratic Congresswoman from Georgia, Nikema Williams. She is one of 20 black congresswomen who sent a letter urging President Biden to declare a public health emergency in the wake of Friday's ruling. Congresswoman, it's nice to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having this conversation.
So you signed two of these letters this week, one ahead of the ruling from 20 black congresswomen and one after from the Congressional Black Caucus, calling on President Biden to declare a public health emergency for abortion access. What specifically would that do?
So, Peter, I first think we have to look at this in context. I'm in the state of Georgia, where maternal mortality rates are worse here than they are in some third world countries. That means that more black women die in the state of Georgia within 1 year of childbirth than they do in third world countries, and that's not okay. Half of our counties, half of our 159 counties don't even have an OBGYN. And so we have to look at this in the context of the health disparities that already exist and what this means for those people already living on the margins of society. So that's why I signed on to those letters, so that we can get care and infrastructure to the women who are going to be hurt most by this decision.
So let me get back to that. What would a national public health emergency specifically do, what you're calling for? In real terms, how could that change the situation in the near term?
So I'm looking at making sure that women have access to health care. Right now, we still have over 500,000 people in the state of Georgia that don't even have health care with the Affordable Care Act in place. So we are one of those states that didn't expand Medicaid. We need to keep all options on the table to make sure that people are able to get the care that they need during this time.
Let me walk you through some of the figures, and these are dramatic. Obviously, as you've noted, Joyce Beatty in that CBC letter said that this decision is going to escalate a black maternal mortality crisis in the country, that restricting access to abortion care will disproportionately endanger black Americans, an issue that, as you know very well right here. So these are the figures. The risk of dying from pregnancy complications for black mothers is more than double the risk for white or Hispanic mothers. And 38% of people who are seeking abortions are black. So what are you hearing from constituents in your community? What specifically are they telling you right now about their concerns and, frankly, about the distances they'd be required to travel to get to states where they are eligible for an abortion?
So, Peter, one of the things that we have to realize is that 1 in 4 women, not 1 in 4 Democrats or Republicans, but 1 in 4 women will seek abortion care by the time they're 45. So this issue impacts so many people so broadly. That's why it's so critical that we address this in terms of those who will be mostly impacted. And we also know that 68% of Georgians, all Georgians, don't agree with the decision of Roe v. Wade being overturned. And so we are in the midst of an election season. Georgia is a true battleground state, and we know that voters are going to remember who's standing with them to make personal private medical decisions, and it's not the Republican Party and the Republican courts.
So let's break this down in real terms right now. You know, the White House can only do so much. I was there in the room when the president made his announcements on Friday. Congress is basically is pretty limited as well, given the present makeup of Congress. You can try to codify Roe, but Democrats, as you know, they don't have the votes in the Senate. So is this messaging setting Democrats up for failure in some way? Do you risk disappointing voters rather than firing them up? You're going to say, hey, get more Democrats elected, we'll be able to flip this. But it's not necessarily clear that that's the case. There's nowhere near 60 votes on the Senate side.
So one of the things that we know is this was reverted back to the states, Peter. And right now in Georgia, we're awaiting the 11th Circuit to either continue to uphold or send our abortion ban, Republican abortion ban, and have it enforced here in Georgia. And right now, every state legislator in Georgia is on the ballot. Every constitutional officer is on the ballot. This decision reverts back to the courts, and the people will have the final say.
So let me ask you specifically now. Obviously, we saw with gun legislation, clearly that was a compromise last week. Frankly, it would have been a major headline were it not for this Supreme Court decision on Friday. Nonetheless, a compromise was progress, right? There were folks on both sides disappointed, but certainly recognized that there was value in taking steps forward. Would you support incremental steps in Congress? Small steps. It wouldn't address the entire issue, but if that's all that they could get, is that worth doing? Is that what would pass?
So I am willing to do whatever I can to make sure that people get the care that they need and we continue to serve the communities who are looking for us to be their voice in Washington. The gun legislation, it wasn't everything that I wanted, but it was the first meaningful legislation to pass to curb gun violence in our states, in our communities in 30 years. So we did what we could, but we're not done fighting. We are here in Washington to represent the people, and that's what I always do as the member serving Georgia's 5th Congressional District.
Congresswoman Nikema Williams, we appreciate your time and your perspective today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Peter.
Coming up right here, the legal fight over abortion rights. States responding to the end of Roe protections with their own laws as the high court sides with conservatives yet again today. This time on the issue of prayer in school. And later, new January 6th revelations and hearings, groundbreaking Supreme Court rulings, war in Europe, sky-high inflation, the economy, how all of it is shaping the upcoming midterms. We'll break it down. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Friday's Supreme Court ruling has left a confusing patchwork of abortion laws in its wake, and the confusion is only going to keep growing. Many states have immediately banned abortions, while some are waiting for their trigger laws to go into effect in the next few weeks. And some states' laws are already tied up in the court, with lawsuits blocking bans from taking effect. Earlier today, a state court in Louisiana blocked that state's trigger ban from going into effect in response to a lawsuit. Joining us now for a deeper dive on the legal ramifications of Friday's Supreme Court decision is NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams. Pete, help us out here. Before we get into the Roe decision, I do want to ask you about the decision that came from the court today. The justices ruled in favor of a football coach that was banned from praying on the field with his team after a high school game. So between Friday and today's ruling, what does that tell us about where the court stands ideologically right now?
Well, first, let me tell you what the decision said. This was a coach who would pray on the football field on the 50-yard line after games. And the school said you've got to find a more private place to do that because otherwise it looks like we're endorsing your religious views. But today the Supreme Court said no, the school district was wrong, that he was acting in his private capacity. The game was over. Players were leaving the field. So he was doing so as an individual, and therefore his prayer was protected under the First Amendment under both free expression and freedom of religion. The dissenters said he's still the coach. He's got his uniform on. He's got the whistle around his neck. There is the possibility the players would feel coerced. I don't think, Peter, that this brings us any closer to prayer in the class, which, of course, the Supreme Court has long since said is unconstitutional, because the court seemed to go out of its way to make a distinction here and say he was not acting in his capacity as a coach or a teacher. He was doing so in his private capacity. But nonetheless, now to get to your question, this is another example of the Supreme Court. There's two parts of the First Amendment. One says free exercise. The other says establishment. Don't establish a religion. Don't have government endorse a religion. And in the past, those two were sort of in balance. But in recent years, the court has been much more solicitous of claims of religious freedom. So it's undoubtedly another step toward lowering the wall of separation between church and state.
Yeah, no doubt. That case coming from Bremerton in Washington State. We've also seen these challenges on the topic of abortion again. The state abortion bans being challenged, popping up since the ruling, challenging these trigger laws, among other things. This appears to be the future of this fight, right? It's going to be state by state, lawsuit by lawsuit. Can you give us a preview of what we should be watching and where some of those fights are taking place right now?
Well, these lawsuits have now been filed in 8 states, several of them, most of them just since Sunday. So they're happening very fast, and they sort of fall into two categories. The Louisiana one that got a ban on the enforcement of the state law. So Louisiana abortion is back in effect in Louisiana, was based on a claim that Louisiana had 3 separate trigger laws that all had sort of slightly different things that were illegal and allowed. And what the plaintiff said is, you know, we don't know what we're supposed to do here. This is all very confusing. So the judge has put a hold on enforcement of the bans in Louisiana, and it's scheduled a hearing for next Friday, July the 8th. In the other states, there's a couple of theories. There's a long-standing lawsuit, or one that's been pending for a while in Florida, that says a ban on abortion is a violation of religious freedom. But I think most of these lawsuits, Peter, are going to be filed on a theory that while the Supreme Court has said there's no right to abortion under the U.S. Constitution, there is a right under the state Constitution. There's a privacy claim in Florida. There's a claim that Utah's Constitution gives greater protection to family considerations, family planning. There's a lawsuit in Mississippi that was just filed within the last couple of minutes that says that Mississippi's privacy law specifically says a choice to make abortion, choose abortion. So that's where these lawsuits are going to be fought out, and you know, it's just way too soon to know whether any of them will be successful.
Yeah, the gist is this litigation, though done at the Supreme Court for now, will continue in the states for quite a while going forward. I want to talk to you about what the Attorney General Merrick Garland and frankly both President Biden have said. They've said that they will work to protect access to FDA-approved abortion medications, abortion pills. Can states ban the use of drugs used in medication abortions, if they are mailed from a state where abortion is legal? Which is to say, if, you know, the same way they're discussing transport, there's different states, and if you get it from a state where it's legal to a state where it's not, what do they say?
And the answer to the question is nobody knows for sure. Now, what the Justice Department has said is a state can't ban that by arguing that the medications are somehow unsafe or ineffective, because the Federal Food and Drug Administration has already determined that those medications are safe and effective. But that leaves the door open for states to try to ban them for some other reason. And I've been talking to lawyers who have worked in this field, lawyers working on some of these cases that have been filed, and they simply don't know the answer to the question of if a patient is in a banned state and wants to get the medication from a non-banned state, whether that would violate the law in the banned state. It's all the state bans are somewhat different, and it's hard to give a blanket answer to that question.
Yeah, questions on that, questions on travel between states, questions.
That seems an easier one, I think.
Yeah.
The travel, I don't know of any state that's trying to make it illegal to travel to another state to try to get abortion services. And Brett Kavanaugh, in his concurrence on Friday, Justice Kavanaugh said he doesn't believe that would be constitutional.
Yeah, no doubt. Pete Williams, thank you for your expertise throughout all of our coverage of this. We appreciate you. And coming up right here, breaking news from the Capitol as the January 6th committee announces a surprise hearing now on the books for tomorrow, plus how the abortion ruling is already shaking up the midterms. We'll get into both of those things. You're watching Meet the Press now. We're back now on Meet the Press Now. We're going to dive further into the fallout on abortion. But first, we do want to share with you that breaking news that involves the investigation into the January 6th insurrection. Just this afternoon, stunning a lot of the reporters who've covered this very thing, the House Select Committee on January 6th announced that it would be holding a surprise hearing tomorrow. It'll take place at 1 Eastern, quote, to present recently obtained evidence and receive witness testimony. Let's take you to the Hill right now. NBC News senior congressional reporter Scott Wong. He joins us with the very latest. So, Scott, walk us through this. This kind of came out of nowhere. The expectation was that they were going to float the hearings to later on in July, where they could kind of own the headline window and sort of get all their ducks in a row here. But they say this one is urgent.
That's right, Peter. We thought we were going to have a nice, quiet week after being on the go for the last 3 weeks with 5 of these January 6th committee hearings. Chairman Benny Thompson had said that he was pushing the rest of the hearings in June until after the July 4th holiday, but apparently they have something urgent that they feel that they want to share with the public and the press. As you mentioned, they said that they have newly obtained information and evidence from their January 6th investigation. They're also going to offer witness testimony. We don't know, unlike in past hearings where they've laid out the names of the witnesses who will be testifying before the committee, in this case, we do not have any names as of now. This will be a surprise witness heading into tomorrow's hearing at 1 p.m. Afternoon.
So, Scott, let's talk about that for a second. The idea that there's a surprise witness here, right? We've heard Liz Cheney in recent days calling out Pat Cipollone, the former White House counsel, saying they would want to hear more from him. I've been in touch with his aides in recent days. It doesn't appear that he's in any position to be their sort of surprise witness now. Is there any better understanding of who this person might be or why they need to hear from them immediately?
As of now, there is not any better understanding. You mentioned Cipollone has said basically that under executive privilege, he does not want to appear. He has cooperated in the past in informal talks with the January 6th committee, obviously providing them with some information. But he has not wanted to participate in any formal capacity, certainly not in a public setting as of now. Who knows if that may change. Some other options, obviously the documentary that came of light in recent days. This was a documentary filmmaker who has been sharing various clips of the days leading up to January 6th when he was spending time with President Trump and the Trump family behind the scenes. The committee is poring over some of that information and certainly talking to that documentary filmmaker. That is certainly another possibility of somebody who could step forward before the January 6th committee when they hold their 6th hearing tomorrow.
Scott Wong's on the Hill for us. Scott, if you learn anything in the course of the time we're on the air, I know we'll get right back to you, so we'll let you do some reporting right now. Thank you for joining us. We want to get to our panel if we can, and I'm joined by the Washington Post. Mariana Sotomayor. Faiz Shakur is the senior advisor to Bernie Sanders, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman joins us as well. All right, let's break this up with the table right now. You cover the Hill, you cover Congress. You did it for us at NBC. Now you do it for our sister station, as it were, over the Washington Post. What more are you hearing about this, the urgency for this hearing? We really did think there was going to be a pause, largely in anticipation of the potential for a Supreme Court ruling on abortion. It came sooner than even the White House thought. So what's happening?
Yeah, you know, Scott said it perfectly, where it was a complete surprise. And it is very odd that this committee is not actually laying out who's going to be before them tomorrow. And we keep asking, and I'm sure we're not the only reporters in town who want to know whoever is going to testify, because it is this urgent feeling of, okay, well, there must be some new information. What is it? Who is bringing that information? And, you know, in the last couple of weeks, the chairman, Benny Thompson, has been saying that they have a tip line and that's been ringing off the hook ever since these hearings have started. They've been getting more information from the National Archives as well, and that documentary that Scott also mentioned. So there are things that have been coming in, but for it to be pushed forward to break up recess. Washington is pretty quiet right now on the Hill. That's pretty significant.
Yeah, and why is it information that has to happen right now? Why can't it hold? What does it say about perhaps who this witness is or whatever else? Matt, I want your reaction to this right now, because it felt pretty broadly to Americans paying attention that they've been laying out a very strong case right now. Whether or not they're able to, whether the Justice Department would go after Donald Trump as a function of this, there are a lot of Americans paying attention who feel like this is all the evidence you could possibly need. Among Republicans right now, is there any movement, independent, more moderate-minded Republicans that see this? Does this potentially mean the end of Donald Trump's 2024 candidacy?
You know, I think this won't have any really particularly play in the midterms. I think if pro or con, if January 6th is a major factor in your vote, you've decided who you're voting for.
Let's look at 2024, though, acknowledging, right? You have, like, even the most recent polling that came out of New Hampshire showed that Ron DeSantis was beaten up on Donald Trump. Okay, maybe by a little bit, but it's certainly movement.
I think that's true, but I don't think January 6th has much to do with that. I think whether it's Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, David Perdue in Georgia, there is, even in statewide races, a 30 to 35% of Republicans who are still firmly aligned with Donald Trump, come thick or thin. It's that 60%, I feel like, which is up for grabs. And it's whether that's tone, policy, COVID, DeSantis played a huge role in maybe getting the right of Trump on that. That's where you're seeing those numbers come from.
I want your take on this, Fez, as I can. As having formerly worked for Bernie Sanders, obviously, you know that the January 6th issue can be a very significant issue for Democrats. It seems like abortion is going to be a big motivator as well. Who does that have the possibility of swaying?
Well, first on January 6th, props to the Democrats. They feel like, you know, they've got the plot of the Titanic to work with in some sense. You know the outcome, you know the ending, you know the result of what happened on January 6th. So how do you animate this? Well, you do some primetime network television, you do some surprise guests, you do some surprise hearings, and my hat's off to them because they're animating an issue that many people already know the conclusion on. So they're doing a good job on that. On abortion, I think we got a really open question around whether this mobilizes the Democratic base. If it does, I think we got a much tighter election than many Republicans were hoping or wishing for. If it doesn't, then I think that one of the things the Democrats are having to contend with is a deep sense of cynicism that's out there among the American public. There's an open question whether does abortion make you more cynical about government, or does it hopefully propel you and make you a voter?
But you say it's still to be determined whether or not this is going to motivate Democrats. You don't think? Clearly,
that's right.
So why is that? I think you hear from a lot of Democrats that this is a motivator, and the thought was perhaps that there may be people in the middle who are just sort of upset with the whole system, Democrats and Republicans, who may say, at least on this issue, though, we can't turn the clock back 50 years.
So there's a couple of immediate responses to that on the data, Peter. One is that on the issue of abortion, it didn't often emerge as one of the top 3 issues of many voters before this.
Before Roe was overturned, correct.
Exactly. So now the question is, does it emerge as a highly salient issue, first of all? Then I think secondly is like the question of whether people vote. Does it compel voter behavior? That's not an open, we've seen it on other issues like guns. We've seen it on economic issues for sure. Those propel people to the voting booths. Does this do it? And I think this will be the first time post-Roe, the decision of the dismantling of it, that we'll see. Does it actually propel voter behavior?
And Mariano, to you, there is a question right now. Obviously, you know, you heard from the president. I was there when he was delivering that speech. He said this fall Roe is on the ballot, as if Democrats win enough seats, they can somehow codify Roe. They can't codify Roe. Maybe perhaps they get 2 more Democrats who believe in blowing up the filibuster and potentially that way, but they're nowhere near the 60 seats they need. Is there a risk for Democrats here in this continued messaging that they say to their voters, we're going to give you this, this, and this, and then they can't deliver on those things?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been hearing from some House Democrats even today who say, OK, if the message is get out there and vote, it's election time, you have the power to bring us, not just make sure to keep that House majority, but also expand the Senate Democratic majority, then we'll be able to do stuff. Well, I spoke to Cori Bush earlier today. He said, well, we've been telling Democrats for a really long time, Democratic voters, hey, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And we have the power right now in Congress. We have the White House, and we can't deliver. We can't keep saying, hey, we're going to keep delivering. Hey, turn out if there isn't anything to deliver on at a time, to your point, where voters are saying, OK, I voted for you, and you're not giving us anything.
Yeah, I was recently speaking to a Democratic lawmaker who said to me, we don't need to fix the world. We just need to chip away at the problems, to demonstrate progress, that we're getting things done. And to you, Matt, what challenges does this pose for Republicans? Privately, we hear from those close to Donald Trump saying even he himself, right, ultimately it was the 3 court picks that are responsible for this move on Roe. He acknowledges that this could challenge this issue, could challenge the midterm advantage that Republicans have going in.
Yeah, I mean, it's added an element of certainty, right? Republicans, by I think most polls, were, ahead. And I think 1.2, even if Democrats get the 2 senators, let's say, that want to put the filibuster, I think almost everyone believes Republicans are going to take the House. So that makes another kind of impediment in there, too. And look, if I was telling Republicans running right now, there is history. When I was at the NRCC, you can run offense on abortion. The stock answer among Democrats is to not list any limits. You saw it with Stacey Abrams over the weekend on Fox. Chuck Todd interviewed Nan Whaley, who's running for Ohio governor. Same thing. So you can go on offense in your district. So you don't need necessarily make that your main issue, but you don't need to shrink from it either.
We're going to
Please, no, go ahead.
We're going to get a first test on this in Kansas.
Yeah, I was going to say,
August.
Kansas race comes up in August. We're going to get a real good sense.
And on that score, it's a state's constitutional right. And if voters uphold it, which it currently exists by the court, voters uphold it, I think it sets a model for the kind of thing that you could see play out in a lot of red states, right? Do people want to codify a right in the Constitution or under state law? And I think that's an easy one, for Democrats to play on offense on. I think also you have to recruit down-ticket candidates. I don't know how many state legislative seats were up for grabs before. There should be more state Democratic candidates running for state legislature on this issue. We'll see.
Fez, this kind of goes into this idea right, that there is a theme here for the Democrats. It's a sort of far-right ideology that's driving the Republican Party on all these issues, January 6th, abortion, a variety of different topics. Is that the central sort of theme that they can try to deliver in a way that is sort of digestible for those people paying attention?
You got to take the theme and build one, right? So certainly abortion rights is one in which you would argue, I'd say, a right-wing ideology has taken over and a minority rule of government now exists. And in order to reclaim majoritarian rule, and one that represents people, not just women, all men too, it has to be more than just abortion rights.
Yeah.
It has economic rights as well. I mean, in fact, when I think about abortion, I do think of it as economic rights for women. Women in the workplace have succeeded over the past 40 years and grown in stature and importance in the workplace because they've had more control of their bodies, more health care available.
To say nothing of those who are poor, low-income families are going to be the most disproportionately impacted by this. Last thought, Matt.
Real quick, I think, again, Democrats need to demonstrate that this has to overtake inflation and cost of living, which I think everyone agrees is the number one issue. That's the challenge they have.
Another challenge for the Republicans, right? After the guns issue, they thought that would help bring back the suburban women. Now abortion may flip that issue again. We got a long way to go until the midterms this fall. We appreciate you all being here, Mariana. Always nice to see you back in this building. And coming up right here, new reports on an attack on civilians in Ukraine. We have the very latest from overseas, just as the president is meeting with foreign leaders against a backdrop of war. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We have new exclusive reporting that President Biden plans to announce extending the increased U.S. troop presence in Poland and changing the U.S. military footprint in the Baltic states while he is in Europe this week. That news comes as G7 leaders gather today in Germany. The focus was, unsurprisingly, the war in Ukraine. All while the Kremlin renewed its attacks in parts of Ukraine beyond where the brunt of the fighting has recently been taking place. According to President Zelensky, a Russian missile struck a civilian shopping mall in central Ukraine today. Ukrainian officials say at least 13 people have died. NBC News has not yet confirmed that figure. And over the weekend, Russia struck a residential building in Kyiv, killing one, injuring 6 others, including a 7-year-old girl and her mother, according to the city's mayor. NBC's Ellison Barber is joining us now from on the ground in Kyiv. My colleague Kristen Welker also joins us from Austria. She is covering the president's G7 meetings. Ellison, we'll start with you. Russia seems to be stepping up its strikes beyond eastern Ukraine. What more do we know about today's attack on that mall? Appears to have been at least hundreds who were inside at the time. And how are Ukrainians in Kyiv reacting to the strike over the weekend in the capital that, at least for the recent period of time, had seemed to be a bit off limits?
Yeah, so in terms of that shopping mall, right now we understand 2 rockets hit that building this afternoon. At least 1,000 people were reportedly inside as those walls began to collapse, and that building was just engulfed in flames. When you look at the images coming out of this area, you see people just fleeing from this shopping center. This was, according to people we've spoken to, kind of just this central sort of busy area. This is a community that is a bit of a transportation hub for central eastern Ukraine. There's a fairly large train station near this shopping center. President Zelensky says that there was no military or strategic reason for Russia to launch anything at this shopping center or kind of in the nearby area, at least from what we know right now. He says that there were people here who were, in his words, just trying to live a normal life, do some shopping in the afternoon. As of an hour ago, we understand that search and rescue teams were still on the ground going through the rubble, trying to look for any survivors. It comes just on the heels of Kyiv being really bombarded compared to how it had been with missile strikes. We went to 2 of them yesterday morning in the hours after they struck a residential area. One of the missiles hit a 9-story apartment building. At least 1 person died in that, a man in his late 30s. 4 people were injured, including that man's 7-year-old daughter. Just down the road, a couple of blocks from that residential apartment building, there was a kindergarten, and a missile landed there as well, creating just this massive crater in the playground. Luckily there, it was so early in the morning hours that no one was outside and no one was injured in that strike. But one of the people who lived nearby told us he saw at least 4 incoming missiles from his balcony. Ukraine Ukrainian officials say, particularly looking at the strikes here in Kyiv, they believe this was some sort of warped show of force where Russia was trying to intimidate Ukrainian citizens and also put pressure on leaders at the G7 summit as they were discussing additional sanctions against the Russian Federation.
Well, that takes me to Kristen Ellis. And Kristen, to you specifically on that topic of the message to the G7 leaders today. President Zelensky participated remotely in that conversation. Can you take us there? What was his message to them? And specifically, what is the push for right now as it relates to further efforts against Russia?
Yeah, it's a really important question, Peter. President Zelensky addressing the G7 leaders remotely and asking for more military aid, asking for more humanitarian aid, specifically surface-to-air missiles, those medium to long-range missiles. Now, President Biden is set to approve those defense systems. I am told once that happens, that first system could be moving toward Ukraine within a matter of days, and then the Department of Defense will look for other systems that they can get to Ukraine. But the fact that he addressed the leaders here, he's going to address the NATO leaders a little bit later on this week. It's really adding urgency to why they are here and focusing what their purpose is in these diplomatic talks, Peter. And it's really twofold. And speaking with administration officials who are traveling with the president, one, to pressure President Putin to withdraw from Ukraine, to get back at least to the negotiating table, to try to negotiate some type of peace to end this violence and this war in Ukraine. And number two, to try to stabilize the global economies that are dealing with inflation and soaring prices all over the globe. To that first point, the president and his G7 allies announced a ban on Russian gold over the weekend. They're also in talks about potentially capping Russian oil. I'm told an announcement about that could be several weeks away. But, Peter, expect more sanctions to be announced as they try to ramp up the heat on Putin.
Yeah, of course. And one of the fundamental challenges right now is that Vladimir Putin has his eyes further east as he keeps looking to China and India, where they've been purchasing the Russian oil in larger portions in recent months as a function of what we've been witnessing. Kristen Welker on the ground with the president. Ellison Barber, stay safe where you are in Ukraine right now. We do want to turn some other developments from that region, specifically in Moscow, where a court date has now been set for the trial of WNBA star Brittany Griner. Griner's trial will begin this Friday, July 1st. She appeared today behind closed doors for a preliminary hearing and could be seen escorted by police in handcuffs. She didn't say anything to some of the onlooking cameras there. Griner was arrested in February and is being accused of carrying a vape cartridge containing remnants of cannabis oil. If convicted, she could face 10 years in prison. A State Department spokesperson said today, quote, "The Russian Federation has wrongfully detained U.S. citizen Brittany Griner. The U.S. government will continue to provide appropriate support to Ms. Griner and her family. We will continue to press for her release." Still ahead right here, the former defense secretary and CIA director Leon Panetta weighs in on the security challenges facing the Biden administration here and abroad. Our conversation is next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we said right before the break, President Biden in Europe right now is meeting with foreign leaders as his domestic problems continue to pile up. Our next guest knows what it's like to tackle crises from pretty much every angle of American government. He has seen it from all angles. He joins us now, the former defense secretary, former CIA director, former congressman, former White House chief of staff, Leon Panetta. Mr. Secretary, were we to have time, we'd read the whole bio, but I fear there's only a few minutes left in my hour. So let me get to my questions for you. You've got a president right now dealing with more crises than we can count. Ukraine, the economy, inflation, abortion. Is any administration equipped for moments like this?
Well, it's the challenge of the modern presidency is the ability to deal with a number of crises. This president, without question, is facing more than his share of crises between the war in Ukraine, inflation, the economy, COVID, and all of the other challenges that confront him. Presidents have to have an approach to dealing with those crises one at a time. They can't just do hit and miss. They've got to have some kind of clear strategy in approaching each of those crises so that at least a president can get his arms around the problems facing this country. That's the challenge right now, is to be able to do that.
So let me ask you about Ukraine as we start right now. The headlines from there: Vladimir Putin striking Kyiv again, hits a civilian shopping mall today, roughly 1,000 people inside at the time. Is that a message to those allied leaders together in Europe right now?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. Look, Putin is basically engaging in barbarism, which means that he's going to kill whoever he has to kill. He's going to blow up buildings. He's going to destroy. His main effort here is to wear down the United States, our allies, and Ukraine. That's his primary goal through this long, protracted war of attrition. So it is very important for the United States and our allies. I think that's the primary message that's coming out of the G7. I assume it'll be the same message out of NATO, which is that the United States and our allies have to remain strongly unified in providing support to Ukraine.
Yeah, the president heading to those NATO meetings in Madrid tomorrow. And tonight, the State Department is also calling for the release of the Wnba star, Brittany Griner. Her trial begins at the end of this week. She could face 10 years in Russian prison. I read today something like 1% of those who are put before these trial court judges are acquitted. So the expectation is that she would clearly be convicted here. What options are available to the president and to this administration?
Well, you're right. There's no due process in Russia, and she will be convicted. And that, too, is part of Putin's strategy of basically intimidation. He's going to continue to do that. I think the strongest thing right now is to make clear that Putin will not succeed in Ukraine. The only thing he responds to is force. I think it's very important for the United States and our allies to be providing up-to-date air defense systems to Ukraine so that they can push back on the Russians. That is key right now. We can't enter a protracted war. That's what Putin wants. We've got to be able to give Ukraine the ability to push back on the Russians and to ultimately wear them down so that they understand that Putin cannot succeed.
Mr. Secretary, we're ticking off these crises around the globe. You have to think about Iran as well. The State Department confirming today that the U.S. and Iran are set to resume indirect talks. What does a successful deal there look like? Can the U.S. afford to delay any agreement with Iran?
Well, it's obviously a huge challenge at a time when we're confronting the problems in Ukraine and elsewhere in the world. But it clearly has to be an agreement that doesn't put Iran in a stronger position than they're in at this point in time. They've had a lot of sanctions placed against them. If there's total relief on those sanctions, and if we do not achieve any pushback to get them back within the limits of the nuclear agreement, then this is going to be a very difficult deal to be able to sell.
I want to ask you about some reporting from my colleague Courtney Kuby at the Pentagon. She's now reporting about how every branch of the U.S. military is struggling to meet its 2022 recruiting goals. The stat I read was that only 23% of Americans ages 17 to 24 right now are qualified to serve without a waiver. Among the challenges, obesity, drug use, criminal records. How concerning is that to you? And are you worried about the sustainability of an all-volunteer force?
I really don't. I think ultimately the volunteers are going to be there, and we're going to remain the strongest military power on the face of the earth. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't pay attention to the recruiting challenges that we're facing. We've got to be able to do outreach. We've got to be able to appeal to those who are willing to volunteer for service in this country. We've got the strongest military on the face of the earth. I think the American people, and particularly those who do serve in uniform, they do respond when the United States needs their help in protecting our freedom and our democracy. So I'm confident that ultimately we'll get the right people in our military.
And Mr. Secretary, very quickly, I finished where we started, which is about the president, the challenges he's facing. How satisfied are you with the sort of the messaging from the White House, how they're dealing with these things? You know, it's a time where Some say they should be selling this line of resilience after COVID, after former President Trump and the like. But it seems like too often they ricochet from one message to another, and it sort of gets lost in the eyes of Americans.
Well, as I said, they're facing a number of challenges, but I do wish that they could take the time to present a vision of where this country needs to go. We're facing a lot of crises. We're facing a lot of problems. But this country has always succeeded by having a vision of where we need to go in the future in order to be able to protect our democracy. That's the vision I would like to see the president and the administration present to the American people.
Leon Panetta, Mr. Secretary, we always appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks for being with us this hour. I'm going to be back in this chair tomorrow for more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with my friend Hallie Jackson.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.